The independence of Singapore began a long time ago when it was part of the Malay archipelago. However, between the 16th and 19th centuries, the archipelago was gradually taken over by the Dutch, who established a monopoly over trade in the area. In 1818, Stamford Raffles was appointed the Lieutenant Governor of the British colony at Bencoolen, now known as Bengkulu in Indonesia. As the then existing ports were not on the main trading route, Raffles went on an expedition to seek a new British base in the archipelago and soon found a small island with a relatively small population of about 150 people. At that time, the island was headed by Abdul Rahman, which was later succeeded by his elder brother Hussein Shah, who granted the British the right to set up trading ports on the island, leading to the birth of modern Singapore. After the establishment of the settlement, Raffles left for Bencoolen, leaving William Farquhar in charge. However, establishing a trading port from scratch was daunting and was made more punishing since Raffles declared Singapore would be a free port and prohibited William from collecting port duties. Singapore's status as a free port provided a crucial advantage over other ports where tariffs were levied, leading to its growth to become an important port in the region. As a result, traders flocked to the island, seeking to escape the Dutch trade restrictions. The population reached an astonishing 10,000 in 1824. By 1827, the Chinese had become the largest ethnic group in Singapore. They came from Malacca, Penang, and other parts of the Malay archipelago. Their numbers were swelled by those feeling the turmoil caused by the Opium War. A large number of males were Chinese coolies who engaged in unskilled hard labor, forming the early backbone of Singapore's labor force, whereas the women found jobs in construction and were known as Sam Sui women or Hong To Sin, due to the weight cloths they wrapped around their head which would become their trademark feature. These cloths kept their hair clean while they worked, and red was used as it caught attention easily, hence minimizing accidents at work. The Malays were the second largest ethnic group. They consisted of unskilled laborers, traders, and convicts who were sent to carry out public works projects. There were also Indian sepoy troops garrisoned at Singapore by the British. Life in Singapore was peaceful until 7 December 1941 when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and the east coast of Malaya, causing the Pacific War to begin. One of Japan's objectives was to capture Southeast Asia and secure the rich supply of natural resources to feed its military and industrial needs. As the main allied base in the region, Singapore was an obvious military target because of its flourishing trade and wealth. The military was confident that Fortress Singapore would withstand any Japanese attack, and this confidence was further reinforced by the arrival of Force C, a squadron of British warships dispatched to the defense of Singapore, including the battleship HMS Prince of Wales and cruiser HMS Repulse. The squadron was to have been accompanied by a third capital ship, the aircraft carrier HMS Indomitable, but it ran aground en route, leaving the squadron without air cover, resulting in the two battleships being sunk by a force of Japanese bombers and torpedo bomber aircraft. After this incident, Singapore suffered daily air raids with casualties ranging from tens to the hundreds each time. A mere 55 days after the start of the invasion, the Japanese had conquered the entire Malay Peninsula and were poised for the invasion of Singapore. Despite bombing the causeway linking Johor to Singapore, the Allied forces led by Percival ultimately surrendered to Yamashita on New Year, 15 February 1942. Singapore was occupied by the Japanese from 1942 to 1945. During the 3 years, the Japanese imposed harsh measures against the local population. The Japanese police of Kempeitai were particularly ruthless towards the Chinese who supported the war effort in China. The most notable atrocity was the Sokching massacre of the Chinese and Peranakan civilians, in which our forefather Lee Kuan Yew narrowly escaped. To discourage Western influence, the Japanese set up schools and forced the people to learn their language. Every morning, students had to recite the Japanese national anthem, Kimi ga Yo, while facing the direction of Japan. Textbooks were printed in Japanese, and radio and movies were broadcast and screened in Japanese. Japanese propaganda and banners also went up all around Singapore, and so did many of Japanese Rising Sun flag. The failure of Britain to defend Singapore destroyed its credibility as an infallible ruler in the eyes of Singaporeans. The decades after the war saw a political awakening amongst the local populace, and the rise of anti-colonial and nationalist sentiments, epitomized by the slogan Merdeka, or independence in the Malay language. As Lee recalled, in 70 days of surprises, upsets, and stupidities, British colonial society was shattered, and with it all the assumptions of the Englishman's superiority. In a radio broadcast made in 1961, Lee said, "He emerged from the war determined that no one, neither Japanese nor British had the right to push and kick us around, and that we could govern ourselves. The first Singapore elections were held in March 1948. However, only British subjects had the right to vote. 3 months after the elections, the Malayan Emergency broke out, also known as the Anti-British National Liberation War. The British imposed tough measures to control left-wing groups in both Singapore and Malaya, and introduced the controversial Internal Security Act, which allowed indefinite detention without trial for persons suspected of being threats to security. Since the left-wing groups were the strongest critics of the colonial system, progress on self-government was stalled for several years. In 1955, David Marshall, leader of the Labour Front, became the first Chief Minister of Singapore. However, he presided over a shaky government and received little cooperation from both the colonial government and the other local parties. Social unrest was on the rise, with the Marahatok riots, the Hawley bus riots, and also the Chinese middle school riots, further increasing tensions between the local government and the people. These such incidents as a vital lesson learned in the importance of racial and religious understanding and harmony, as well as a case for imposing a certain degree of government control on the media, especially when racial or religious issues are implicated. Marshall resigned in 1956 after failure in the Malacca talks with the British to negotiate for complete self-rule. Marshall was replaced with Lim Yew Hock, who immediately launched a crackdown on communist and leftist groups, imprisoning many trade union leaders and several pro-communist members of the PAP under the Internal Security Act, thus winning the approval of the British government to grant complete internal self-government. The state of Singapore would be created with its own citizenship. The Legislative Assembly will be expanded to 51 members entirely chosen by popular elections, and the Prime Minister and Cabinet control all aspects of the government except defense and foreign affairs. Elections for the new Legislative Assembly were held in May 1959. The People's Action Party won the polls in a landslide victory, winning 43 out of 51 seats. They accomplished this by appealing to the Chinese-speaking majority, particularly those in the labor unions and radical student organizations. Its leader Kuan Yew thus became the first Prime Minister of Singapore. However, PAP's victory was at first view dismissed by the foreign and local business leaders. Since some party members were pro-communist, many businesses thus left Singapore for Malaysia. Despite these setbacks, the PAP government embarked on a vigorous program to address Singapore's various economic and social problems, from encouraging foreign and local investment with measures ranging from tax incentives to the establishment of a large industrial estate in Jurong, to consolidating the labor unions into a single umbrella organization called the National Trades Union Congress, with strong oversight from the government and well-funded public housing program to solve the long-standing housing problem of shortage and cost. The flag of Singapore was also officially adopted in 1959. The design is a horizontal bicolor of red above white, with a crescent moon facing a pentagon of 5 small white 5-pointed stars in the upper left quadrant. Red symbolizes universal fellowship and equality, and white symbolizes pervading and everlasting purity and virtue. The crescent moon represents a young nation ascendant, while the 5 stars stand for the nation's ideas of democracy, peace, progress, justice, and equality. Singapore has done well in all aspects. However, despite these successes, Lee believed that Singapore's future lay with Malaya. He felt that the historic and economic ties between Singapore and Malaya were too strong for them to continue as separate nations. Furthermore, Singapore lacked natural resources and faced both a declining trade and a growing population that required jobs. Lee thought that the merger would benefit the economy by creating a common market, eliminating trade tariffs, and thus supporting industries will solve the ongoing employment woes. Although the PAP leaders campaigned vigorously for a merger, the pro-communist wing of the PAP is strongly opposed to the merger. The ruling party of Malaya, United Malays National Organization, were also skeptical of the idea of a merger due to their distrust of the PAP government and were concerned that the large Chinese population in Singapore would alter the racial balance on which their political power depended. The issue was worsened when a pro-communist PAP minister defected from the party and beat the PAP candidate in a subsequent by-election, threatening to bring down Lee's government. Fearing the prospect of a takeover by the pro-communists, Yew and Mano changed their mind about the merger and raised the possibility of forming a third Federation of Malaysia comprising the existing Federation of Malaya, Singapore, Brunei, and British Borneo territories of North Borneo and Sarawak. Lee called for a referendum on the merger to be held in September 1962. The referendum did not have an option of objecting to the idea of merger, since no one had raised the issue before then. The referendum had three options. Option A: Singapore could join Malaysia, but would be granted full autonomy and only with fulfillment of conditions to guarantee that. Option B: Singapore was to fully integrate into Malaysia without autonomy, with the status of any other state in Malaysia. Option C: Singapore was to enter Malaysia on terms no less favorable than the bonded territories. After the referendum was held, Option A received 70% of the votes. Thus, Malaya, Singapore, North Borneo and Sarawak were merged, forming Malaysia. Singapore declared its independence from the United Kingdom, with Yusof bin Ishak as the head of state and Lee as prime minister. The union was rocky from the start. During the 1963 Singapore state elections, a local branch of UMNO took part in the election, despite its earlier agreement with the PAP not to participate in the state politics during Malaysia's formative years. Although UMNO lost all its bids, the relation between them worsened. In a tit-for-tat, PAP challenged the UMNO candidates in the 1964 federal election as part of the Malaysian Solidarity Convention, winning one seat in the Malaysian parliament. Racial tension increased as ethnic Chinese and other non-Malay ethnic groups in Singapore rejected the discriminatory policies imposed by the Malays, such as quotas for the Malays as special privileges were granted to them. Meanwhile, the Malays in Singapore were also being increasingly incited by the federal government accusations that the PAP was mistreating the Malays. The external political situation was also tense, with the Indonesian President Sukarno declaring a state of confrontation against Malaysia and initiated military and other actions against the new nation, including the bombing of McDonald House in Singapore, killing 3 people. Indonesia also conducted sedition activities to provoke the Malays against the Chinese. This led to a series of riots, with the most notorious being the 1964 race riots. The state and federal governments also had conflicts on the economic front. UMNO leaders feared that the economic dominance of Singapore would inevitably shift political power away from Kuala Lumpur. Despite earlier agreement to establish a common market, Singapore continued to face restrictions when trading with the rest of Malaysia. In retaliation, Singapore refused to provide Sabah and Sarawak the full extent of the loans previously agreed for the economic development of the two eastern states. The Bank of China branch of Singapore was closed by the central government in Kuala Lumpur, as it was suspected of funding communists. The situation escalated to such an extent that talks between UMNO and the PAP broke down, and abusive speeches and writings became rife on both sides. UMNO extremists even called for the arrest of Lee. Seeing no further alternative to avoid bloodshed, the Malaysian Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman decided to expel Singapore from the Federation. On 9 August 1965, the Parliament of Malaysia voted 126 to 0 in favor of a constitutional amendment of expelling Singapore from the Federation. Fast forward, Singapore has become a country which its citizens are proud to call it home.